What happens when those sworn to protect us become part of the problem? Discover stories that expose the truth, challenge perceptions, and inspire change. If you're passionate about powerful narratives that uncover hidden truths and tackle real-world issues, this is the channel for you. Subscribe now and join a community dedicated to thought-provoking stories and impactful conversations. Don't miss the next one. We're just getting started. Samantha Carter had long been a figure of quiet strength in the community she served. As one of the few black female captains in the city's police department, she had built her career on grit, intelligence, and an unshakable belief in justice. The journey had not been easy. From her first day in uniform, she had faced a system that often seemed determined to test her resolve. There were moments of blatant bias, subtle dismissals, and the constant pressure to prove herself in a world where she was always both visible and overlooked. Samantha had risen through the ranks by outworking, outthinking, and outlasting every challenge. Years into her career, Samantha was a respected leader, known for handling even the toughest situations with grace and determination. Still, she carried the weight of being a trailblazer, a representative for those who hoped to follow her path. She took pride in how far she had come, though the road had been lined with obstacles most of her colleagues could not imagine. This evening, Samantha was just another face in the crowd. She had left her uniform behind and wore casual jeans and a soft gray sweatshirt. Her badge and gun were discreetly tucked away in her purse, out of sight and out of mind. It was one of those rare evenings when she allowed herself to step back from her role and embrace a fleeting sense of normalcy. The city was transitioning from the chaos of the day into the calm of evening. The sky above was painted in hues of purple and orange, and a cool breeze hinted at the approaching night. Samantha loved this time, when the streets buzzed with a quiet rhythm. She strolled through the aisles of a neighborhood grocery store, her basket slowly filling with the small comforts of an ordinary night. This store's hum, punctuated by quiet exchanges between customers and cashiers, was a welcome backdrop to her thoughts. Stepping out of the store, she paused and took in the sounds of the city around her. Cyclists passed by with the clicking of their wheels on the pavement, and a group of teenagers laughed loudly as they walked past. Samantha smiled softly to herself as the simple joys of the world briefly pulled her away from the pressures of her job. For a moment, she was not Captain Samantha Carter, the formidable leader in a demanding profession. She was just Samantha, a woman walking home with her groceries, blending into the fabric of the city she had dedicated her life to protecting. Pressed against the walls of chaos, she looked up at the painted sky and... Ryan Foster sat in his squad car, idly tapping the steering wheel as he scanned the quiet street ahead. The day had been slow, filled with minor calls that barely felt worth reporting. Restless energy coursed through him. Ryan prided himself on being proactive, always ready to act, always eager to prove himself. He had joined the force to make a difference, to be where the action was, yet today felt like an endless stretch of uneventful hours. The static crackle of the radio broke through his thoughts. All units, be advised, we have a 1031 in progress. Robbery suspect described as a black female, mid-30s, wearing dark jeans and a gray sweatshirt. Last seen heading west on 5th and Maple. Ryan straightened in his seat, adrenaline surging. His eyes sharpened as he replayed the details in his mind. Black female, mid-30s, gray sweatshirt. He glanced toward the intersection ahead, his pulse quickening. Finally, something real to sink his teeth into. This was his chance to show he could handle more than just routine stops and paperwork. He turned his cruiser onto Maple, scanning the sidewalks. A woman came into view, walking leisurely with a grocery bag slung over her shoulder. She matched the description perfectly. Mid-30s, dark jeans, gray sweatshirt. Ryan slowed his car, his focus narrowing on her. She appeared calm, unaware of his approach, but to him, it all clicked. It had to be her. His instinct screamed for action. Samantha Carter walked along the street, savoring the cool breeze as it brushed against her face. She had sent a quick message to Grace, letting her know she'd be home soon, her mind already wandering to the dinner she planned to prepare. The simple act of walking through her neighborhood, groceries in hand, felt grounding. For a brief moment, she could shed the weight of her responsibilities. The sharp command jolted her out of her thoughts. "Ma'am, stop right there." The voice was firm, authoritative, and unfamiliar. She turned to see a police cruiser parked nearby, its headlights glaring at her. Behind them stood a young officer, his posture tense and his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Is there a problem, officer?" Samantha asked, keeping her tone calm but edged with confusion. Her years of experience in law enforcement told her to stay composed, to maintain control even as her pulse quickened. "You fit the description of a robbery suspect. Black female, mid-30s, gray sweatshirt, dark jeans," Ryan said as he stepped closer. His tone left no room for doubt in his mind. To him, the pieces fit, and he was already preparing to act. Samantha blinked, caught off guard. I think there's been a mistake. I'm Captain Samantha Carter, 4th Precinct. My badge is in my purse." She shifted her bag slightly, trying to de-escalate the situation with reason and clarity. Ryan barely registered her words. His focus remained fixed on her appearance, on the description looping in his mind. He tightened his grip on his weapon, his nerves steeling him for what he perceived as a possible confrontation. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, his voice sharper now. Samantha frowned, frustration beginning to seep into her controlled demeanor. "Officer, listen to me. I'm a police captain. My badge is right here." She gestured carefully toward her purse, but Ryan cut her off with another command. "Hands where I can see them now," he repeated, his voice rising. The tension in the air was palpable. To Samantha, it was clear he wasn't hearing her. His assumptions had taken root, and nothing she said seemed to break through. Before she could react further, Ryan closed the distance between them, grabbing her arm with an unyielding grip. Samantha's grocery bag fell to the ground, its contents scattering across the sidewalk. The loaf of sourdough bread rolled into the gutter as her purse hit the pavement. The unmistakable sound of handcuffs clicking around her wrists sent a surge of anger and humiliation through her. "Officer Foster, stop," she protested, her voice rising now. "Check my purse. My badge is in there. This is a mistake." Ryan remained resolute, his mind locked on the scene as he envisioned it. He believed he was apprehending the suspect from the call. To him, this was protocol. He had no reason to question it. no time to entertain what he thought were excuses. Bystanders began to gather, their phones raised as they recorded the scene unfolding before them. Whispers grew into murmurs. "Isn't that Captain Carter?" someone asked. Others looked on, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Samantha felt the weight of their stares, the humiliation burning hot in her chest. She had spent years building her reputation, rising through a system that often doubted her. Now, she was just another black woman in handcuffs on a busy street, her identity reduced to nothing by the snap judgment of a young officer who refused to listen. Ryan opened the back door of his squad car and guided Samantha inside, his grip still firm on her arm. She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You don't even realize the mistake you've made," she said. Her words were not just a warning, but a reflection of the larger painful truth she had fought against her entire career. As the car pulled away, Samantha's thoughts churned. She stared out of the window at the city lights passing by, the familiar streets now feeling foreign. She thought about everything she had worked for, the barriers she had broken, and the respect she had earned. None of it seemed to matter in this moment. To Ryan, she wasn't Captain Samantha Carter. She was a suspect who fitted description. The emotional weight of it all pressed down on her. It wasn't just about her. It was about a system that allowed assumptions to take precedence over truth, that reduced individuals to stereotypes in an instant. Samantha closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. This moment would not define her, but it was a reminder of the battles still left to fight. The precinct was buzzing with the hum of routine activity as Officer Ryan Foster walked Samantha Carter through its front doors. Her wrists were still cuffed, her expression stoic, though a flicker of disbelief passed over her face as the familiar surroundings came into view. She had walked these halls countless times as Captain Samantha Carter, commanding respect and authority. But now as she entered under these circumstances, the weight of humiliation settled deep in her chest. Officers paused mid-conversation, their heads turning as whispers spread like wildfire. Recognition dawned on some faces, confusion on others. "Is that Captain Carter?" someone murmured, and the tension in the room grew thick. Ryan remained oblivious to the undercurrent, his focus fixed on following procedure. To him, this was just another suspect in custody. Sergeant Angela Morales stepped out of her office, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Her gaze landed on Samantha, and her breath caught for a moment. Angela's mind raced to piece together what she was seeing. She marched toward Ryan, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Foster, what the hell is going on?" Ryan stopped, momentarily thrown off by her tone. "Robbery suspect," he said simply, gesturing towards Samantha. "She fits the description from dispatch. It's..." Angela's eyes narrowed as she looked at Samantha, then back at Ryan. "Are you out of your mind? This is Captain Carter." The words hit like a slap, and Ryan blinked, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Captain?" he stammered, his voice trailing off as the weight of his mistake began to register. Samantha remained silent, her expression unreadable, though her sharp gaze never left him. Angela stepped forward, pulling her keys from her belt and unlocking the cuffs from Samantha's wrists. The sound of the metal releasing was deafening in the silence that had gripped the room. Samantha rubbed her wrists, the red marks a stark reminder of the indignity she had just endured. Angela turned to Samantha, her voice low with a mixture of apology and urgency. Captain, I didn't know. I'm sorry. Let's get this sorted out. Samantha gave a curt nod, her face still calm, though Angela could see the storm brewing beneath the surface. Chief Edward Monroe was waiting for them in his office, his expression grim. He gestured for Samantha to sit, but she remained standing, her posture straight and unyielding. Angela stood to the side, her discomfort evident as the weight of the situation loomed over the room. Captain Carter, Monroe began, his tone heavy. I want to start by saying that this was a terrible mistake. I've already been briefed on the situation. A mistake? Samantha repeated, her voice steady but sharp. That's what you're calling this? Monroe shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It was a failure of judgment on Officer Foster's part. We will conduct a full review and ensure something like this doesn't happen again. Samantha's calm exterior finally cracked, anger flashing in her eyes. This isn't just about Foster's judgment. This is about a systemic problem. I told him who I was. I gave him every opportunity to verify my identity, but he ignored me. Why? Because I fit a description? Because I'm a black woman in a sweatshirt carrying groceries? Angela flinched at the rawness in Samantha's voice. Monroe sighed, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. I hear you, Samantha, and I agree this incident highlights deeper issues. We've been working on bias training and procedural reforms. Working on them isn't enough, Samantha interrupted, her voice firm. This department talks about change, but moments like this show we're still failing. If I wasn't Captain Carter, what would have happened? How many others are treated the same way because someone like Foster jumps to conclusions? The room fell silent as her words hung heavy in the air. Monroe nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in what she said, but unsure how to respond without sounding defensive. There was a knock at the door. Angela opened it to reveal Ryan, who stood awkwardly in the hallway, his confidence from earlier completely drained. You wanted to see me, Chief? He asked, his voice hesitant. Monroe waved him in. Foster, we need to talk about your actions tonight. Ryan stepped into the room, his gaze flickering towards Samantha before quickly dotting away. He looked pale, his shoulders slumped under the weight of realization. Captain Carter, I didn't know. I swear I didn't realize it was you. Samantha crossed her arms, her expression cold. You didn't realize because you didn't listen. I told you who I was. You dismissed me because you had already decided what you thought I was. A suspect. Not a person, not your captain. Just someone who matched a vague description and did not match the same description of any of the people I followed. Ryan's mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. He looked down, his face flushed with shame. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I was trying to do my job. I thought I was following protocol. Your job, Samantha said, her voice cutting. is to protect and serve. Your job is to assess the situation, to gather facts before making assumptions. You didn't even ask for my ID. You acted on instinct, and your instinct was wrong. Egan nodded, his head hanging lower. I made a mistake. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I'll accept whatever consequences come from this. Samantha studied him for a moment, her anger giving way to something more measured. She could see the regret in his eyes, the weight of his guilt pressing heavily on him. "This isn't just about you, Foster," she said finally. "It's about a culture that allows assumptions to go unchecked. It's about a system that needs fixing." Ryan looked up, his expression earnest. "I want to do better. I want to learn from this. I know I need to change." Monroe spoke up, his voice firm but fair. "Foster, you'll undergo mandatory bias training and be placed on review. This department has no room for errors like this. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Ryan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Samantha turned back to Monroe. "This review can't just be about Foster. This has to be a turning point for the department. We need real reforms, not just lip service." Monroe nodded. "We'll address it. I'll work with you to push these reforms forward." Samantha gave a slow nod, her anger tempered but not extinguished. She turned to Ryan one last time. "This isn't just about punishment. It's about accountability. Learn from this. Don't let it happen again." Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I won't, I promise." As Samantha left the office, Angela fell into step beside her. "Captain, I'm so sorry this happened. I can't imagine how you must feel." Samantha glanced at her, her face softening slightly. "It's not about me, Angela. It's about fixing what's broken before it happens to someone else." She walked down the hallway, her steps steady and purposeful, determined to turn this moment of pain into a catalyst for change. The video of Samantha Carter's arrest spread like wildfire. It was short, shaky, and incomplete, but it captured everything needed to ignite outrage. A black woman in handcuffs, her groceries scattered across the sidewalk. A white officer leading her to a squad car despite her protests. The caption below the video was simple, yet damning. "Black police captain wrongly arrested by her own officer." Within hours, the footage dominated social media platforms, news outlets, and the city's airwaves. Public outcry was swift and fierce. Protests began forming outside the precinct, the chants of justice for Carter echoing through the streets. Signs bearing messages like "No more bias in blue" and "Accountability now" filled the air as the crowd swelled. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Officers moved quietly, their conversations hushed, avoiding Samantha's piercing gaze whenever she passed by. The weight of the public's fury bore down on them all, and no one could deny the gravity of what had happened. Mayor Daniel Reeves called an emergency meeting, his tone clipped as he addressed Chief Bedward Monroe. "This isn't just a department issue anymore. It's a city-wide scandal, and it's on every major network. We need to act fast, and we need to act decisively." Monroe nodded, his jaw tight. "We're preparing a statement, but I think it's crucial that Captain Carter addresses this directly. She's the one who can shift the narrative. Samantha, standing by the window with her arms crossed, turned toward them. This isn't about shifting narratives. It's about taking responsibility. I'll speak, but only if we're clear about what needs to change. This can't be another empty apology followed by silence. The mayor hesitated, clearly weighing the political risks. We need to balance accountability with stability. The city's trust in law enforcement is already fragile. Samantha's voice was calm but firm. If we focus on optics over action, we'll lose whatever trust we have left. People want accountability, and they deserve it. Later that evening, the press conference room was packed. Reporters filled the rows, their pens and cameras ready to capture every word. The tension in the room was palpable, the buzz of whispered conversations and the clicking of camera shutters creating a backdrop of urgency. Mayor Reeves stepped forward first, delivering a carefully crafted statement. His words emphasized regret and promised an independent investigation into the incident. He spoke of procedural reviews and the city's commitment to fairness. But Samantha could see the tightness in his expression, the careful balance of contrition and damage control. Chief Monroe followed, acknowledging the systemic issues within the department and pledging to work with community leaders to implement reforms. His tone was steady, his words precise, but Samantha knew this moment demanded more than bureaucratic promises. When Samantha stepped to the podium, the room fell silent. She looked out over the sea of faces, feeling the weight of their expectations. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady as she began. What happened to me was not just a mistake. It was a reflection of something much larger, something that has been allowed to persist for far too long. I am not here to talk about one officer's actions. I am here to talk about a system that failed not just me, but the community we are sworn to serve. She paused, letting her words sink in, her gaze sweeping across the room. For years, I've worked within this system, believing that we could make it better. I've seen progress, but I've also seen how slow and resistant to change it can be. What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern that many have experienced, but few have the platform to address. Today I stand here because I have that platform, and I will use it to demand the change we all need. The cameras flashed, capturing the determination etched into her face. This is about more than one department, one officer, or one city. It's about the culture we've allowed to grow unchecked. It's about unconscious bias that informs decisions, about assumptions that overshadow facts. If we do not address these issues head on, we are complicit in their continuation. The room was silent, the reporters hanging on her every word. I am not here to assign blame. I am here to demand accountability. Accountability for the decisions made in the field, for the training provided to our officers, and for the leadership that shapes the culture of law enforcement. Accountability starts with us, and it starts now. Her voice softened, but the conviction remained. We owe it to the community to be better. We owe it to the officers who put their lives on the line every day to ensure they are equipped with the training and judgment needed to serve with integrity. And we owe it to ourselves to live up to the values we claim to uphold. She stepped back from the podium, her speech met with a mix of murmurs and applause. The mayor shifted uncomfortably, but Monroe gave her a small nod of approval. Samantha had spoken her truth, and now the city had to respond. After the conference, Samantha stepped outside the precinct, the noise of the protest hitting her like a wave. She paused at the top of the steps, taking in the sight of the crowd. Hundreds of people stood shoulder to shoulder, their chants filling the air. Signs waved above their heads, and the glow of phone screens dotted the sea of faces. As she descended the steps, a young woman approached the barricade, holding a sign that read, "Justice for Samantha." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise around them faded. The woman nodded, a gesture of solidarity, and Samantha nodded back. The support was unexpected, but deeply moving. For all the pain and frustration of the past few days, it was a reminder that she was not alone. This fight was not hers to carry alone. It belonged to everyone who believed in a better, fairer system. Walking through the crowd, Samantha felt a renewed sense of purpose. The chants, the signs, the faces, they were all calling for change, and she was determined to lead that change, no matter how long or difficult the road ahead would be. Samantha Carter sat at her desk, staring at the draft of the reform proposal on her screen. The words felt heavy with the weight of what they represented. Mandatory bias training for all officers. Revised arrest protocols to prevent assumptions from dictating actions. Independent oversight committees to hold officers and the department accountable. Each bullet point was a step toward progress, but Samantha knew the road to implementation would not be easy. She leaned back in her chair, her mind replaying the events of the past week. The protests outside the precinct had calmed slightly, but the tension within the department had not. Some officers supported her push for reform, acknowledging that change was overdue. Others grumbled quietly, their resistance palpable in the way they avoided eye contact or whispered in corners. The police union was the most vocal opponent, arguing that the proposed measures would make officers hesitant in the field, placing their safety at risk. At a heated meeting with union representatives, Samantha faced these arguments head-on. "This isn't about making anyone's job harder," she said firmly. "This is about ensuring that when we wear this badge, we do so with integrity. These reforms aren't punishment. They're a foundation for rebuilding trust with the community."
A union leader leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "And what about officer morale? Do you know how many feel betrayed right now, thinking this is all about blaming them?" Samantha held his gaze. Morale isn't built on avoiding accountability. It's built on pride in doing the job right. If these reforms make us uncomfortable, that's because we need to confront what's been ignored for too long. Chief Monroe sat beside her, his presence lending weight to her arguments. He had expressed his support for the reforms in private, and now in public he echoed her words. "Captain Carter's right. This is about ensuring the safety of everyone, officers and civilians alike. The way we operate has to change, and this is how we start." The mayor, too, lent his voice to the effort, though Samantha could sense his concerns about political fallout. Mayor Reeves had framed the reforms as necessary for public trust, carefully balancing his words to appease both sides. Despite his cautious approach, he had signed off on the initial implementation of the proposal. Progress was slow, but it was progress. The first round of bias training sessions was scheduled, and new protocols were being distributed to precincts citywide. Samantha knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come in how these changes were received and enforced. Ryan Foster was one of the first officers to attend the training. Samantha had made it a point to follow up with him, not out of spite, but because she saw in him the potential for growth. Ryan had been quiet since the incident, his demeanor subdued. He had apologized to her multiple times, each one earnest but tinged with lingering guilt. The training sessions challenged him in ways he hadn't expected. For the first time, Ryan found himself examining the unconscious biases that had shaped his decisions in the field. He sat through exercises that forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, moments when he had let assumptions guide his actions. The process was humbling, but it was also eye-opening. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session, Ryan approached Samantha. "Captain," he began, his voice hesitant, "I want to thank you for pushing this. I didn't realize how much I needed it. I've been replaying that night over and over in my head, and I see now how much I got wrong. I let my own biases take over, and that's on me." Lifting her face, Samantha studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Acknowledging it is the first step, Foster. What matters now is what you do moving forward. Mistakes don't define us, but how we grow from them does." Ryan nodded, his resolve clear. "I'll do better, I promise." For Samantha, his growth was a small but significant victory. It symbolized the possibility of change, even within a system resistant to it. Later that evening, Samantha returned home to Grace Harper, her partner and constant source of strength. The house was quiet, the scent of fresh pasta filling the air as Grace prepared dinner. Samantha dropped her bag by the door and let out a long sigh, the tension of the day melting away as she stepped into the kitchen. Grace turned, her warm smile easing the weight on Samantha's shoulders. "Tough day?" she asked, setting down a glass of wine for her. Samantha nodded, taking a sip and leaning against the counter. "Progress is slow. The union is fighting back, and some officers are pushing back too. But we're moving forward. That's what matters." Grace placed a comforting hand on Samantha's arm. "You're doing something incredible, Sam. It might not feel like it now, but you're making a difference, one step at a time." Samantha's eyes softened, the corners of her mouth lifting into a small smile. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Grace chuckled softly. "You'd still be changing the world, but you'd be a lot grumpier doing it." They shared a quiet laugh, the moment grounding Samantha in a way few things could. As they sat down for dinner, she felt a rare sense of peace. The fight was far from over, but for now, she allowed herself this brief reprieve. That night, as she lay in bed, Samantha reflected on the journey so far. The road ahead was daunting, filled with challenges she could already foresee. But the steps taken in the past weeks had planted seeds of change. The reforms were only the beginning, but they were a start. She thought of the protesters who had stood outside the precinct, their voices demanding justice. She thought of Ryan Foster, his willingness to confront his mistakes. She thought of Grace, always by her side, reminding her why she fought so hard. Samantha Carter closed her eyes, her determination unwavering. Change was slow, often painful, but it was possible. And she would see it through, not just for herself, but for the countless others who needed it. Samantha Carter stood at the back of the precinct's training room, watching as a group of officers participated in the department's first bias training session. The atmosphere in the room was tense but focused. The facilitator guided them through scenarios meant to challenge assumptions and foster reflection. Samantha noticed moments of discomfort on some faces, while others nodded as understanding began to dawn. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. For weeks, she had fought to get to this point, pushing against resistance from within the department and the union. Seeing the training finally take shape felt like a small but meaningful victory. As she watched, Ryan Foster raised his hand to share his thoughts during a discussion. His words were measured and thoughtful, a clear departure from the overconfident officer she had encountered that fateful night. Growth wasn't easy, but Ryan was proof that it was possible. Samantha stepped outside once the session ended, the crisp air hitting her as she descended the precinct steps. A small group of protesters still lingered across the street, their voices quieter than before but no less resolute. One sign caught her attention. It was simple, hand-painted in bold letters. Justice for all. She stood there for a moment, taking in the sight. That sign, and the voices behind it, reminded her of why this fight mattered so much. Her journey hadn't been easy. Rising through the ranks as a black woman in law enforcement had demanded strength, resilience, and endless patience. The wrongful arrest had been a painful reminder of the work still left to do, but it had also reignited her determination to push for change. The reforms now underway were just the beginning. She knew there would be setbacks, resistance, and moments of doubt, but the signs of progress, no matter how small, gave her hope. Samantha thought of the people who had supported her through it all. Grace, whose unwavering love grounded her. Chief Monroe, who had chosen to stand by her vision for a better department. And the protesters who had taken to the streets, their demands amplifying her voice when she needed it most. Together, they had helped her turn a moment of pain into a catalyst for progress. As she walked toward her car, Samantha felt a quiet sense of resolve settle over her. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a system that treated everyone with dignity and fairness, a system that lived up to the ideals it claimed to represent. The road ahead was long, but Samantha Carter was ready for the journey. With her head held high, she drove away from the precinct, determined to keep building the future she believed in.